But thanks for coming down, man. We appreciate it, making the trip from Charlotte.
Yeah, like I said, in
this time of crisis.
In these trying times.
Yes, these strange times.
These trying times. If I hear another commercial with that, I don't think I can.
Well, I want to introduce you properly. I got to make sure we get the title right, though. It's kind of a tongue twister. I think it's Sergeant Dr. Lieutenant Dan. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. Well, I guess technically, so I'm now a first sergeant.
First sergeant, okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of what my troops will kind of call me, you know, because being in the Guard, it's like, do we call you doctor, or like it's first sergeant to you? But but even like I said, when I go and see my clients, it's even funny because, you know, they'll come and when I first introduce myself, and they're like, oh, Dr. Evans. I'm like, yeah, just call me Dan. It's fine. I don't need the pretenses. So
you are a doctor of what?
Doctor of Management in Homeland Security.
And or in Homeland Security?
In Homeland Security.
Got you. So it's a doctor in managing Homeland Security?
So basically, like, you know, like PhDs are theoretical, and I did a practitioner degree, so I did a DM versus a PhD. So basically, I wanted to go out and actually practice versus talk about theories forever. So it's a DM in Homeland Security.
So how is that different from the PhD process? Do you still have to defend
Yeah, you still do a dissertation. The biggest difference is in most PhD programs, you do a lot of theoretical study versus in a practitioner program, you actually have to, part of your grades are how you're interacting and dealing with clients and client problems and projects.
So what kind of problems?
Process, policy, procedure, you know, anything related in and around security, basically.
So specific to security, are you talking cybersecurity, building security, personnel security, all of the above?
All of the above. So here's what's funny. So when I started the program, I started in 2010, and I finished in 2013. So in 2010, people were still calling cyber just IT security. So everything was just kind of siloed. So I always tell people every day of the week, I hate using the word holistic, but I do actual, like the full gamut of security. So everything within security, I look at cyber, fraud, forensics, physical, IT, asset security, supply chain, and basically everything. Because what I've seen a lot of as I've gotten older, the kids, they focus on cyber and they're really great at cyber. But I always kind of remind them, I'm like, okay, you have all these great firewalls in place. You have all this other stuff going on. But what happens when I manipulate and social engineer my way past your guards? I know that your elevator system can also be hacked and manipulated because there's typically a destination dispatch system in most high rises. And then I find the floor that you have all your servers and everything else, and I just physically come and take them from you. And then I bring them to people that can hack them. Did your firewall stop me? And they're like, well, that can't be done. I'm like, no, it can. I said, I can hack your building now. And I can manipulate your physical controls through an IP and basically funnel, you know, how we would hit buildings back in the day, but now there's actually more functional controls to be able to do that.
It's a good thing you're working for the good guys. Well, I guess I shouldn't presume that. I'm assuming you work for the good guys.
Of course.
I know you can't divulge your clients probably, but I know you work for a very large institution that has several clients, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the work I've been able to do is, like, till this day, like, it's kind of mind-blowing. I always go, man, from a dumb kid from the middle of nowhere, South Carolina, I've advised some of the largest private research universities in the country on how to do threat management. So when you think about threat management, you know, it's workplace violence, active shooter, everything across the gamut, but what do you have in place that's going to actually mitigate and hopefully potentially stop a crisis? But if a crisis happens, how are you going to close that response and close that gap? So I've been able to do that. Some of my clients are international clients. Got to go all over the continental U.S. and also internationally. Did some work in Canada, and so it's always funny. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to do any business in Canada. It's actually an interesting process. So you cross over into, you know, obviously you fly in and you get in their customs, but one of the first questions they ask is like, hey, bud, what are you doing here? And are you on business or personal travel, eh? And I always tell them, like, well, I'm actually on business. So the Canadian government's really weird about Americans or really any country coming in and doing work because they go, hey, we have Canadians that can do that. And I mean, so they start monitoring you and everything else. So every time I come in, it's always really funny. And I try not to be crass or anything about it, but they go, "Hey, so you're not here for just meetings, are you?" I'm like, "No, I'm here to advise your clients," which is allegedly a big no-no because they're like, "We have our own cyber, we have our this or that," and they'll go, "Oh, we have those people." I was like, "You don't have people that can do what I do," and they just go, "Oh, what do you mean?" And I'm like, "Well," I said, "You, for one, you don't have anybody that actually advises on Homeland Security, looking at holistic view as far as how it's integrating with your national security, how does it do this, and this. And I said, and the fact that you never had your own 9/11, you kind of watched us from afar, tells me that you need people like me to advise you to be able to be like we are now." And they kind of go, "Yeah, okay, well, all right, we'll let you
come
in
on
the
in,
country.
sir.
Come on in. Hey, welcome to Canada. Hey, go by Tom Hortons. They have good coffee and donuts."
I guess what's interesting is you're mentioning all these different silos, or not really silos, areas of security. I guess it never really ends, does it? So is it more of a mindset than a specific practice area or study area?
So I always look at it. So again, I look at security as security. So you have a lot of organizations, a lot of people that do it in a siloed perspective. So you can concentrate all you want on cyber, or you can concentrate on IT security. You can concentrate on fraud. But if you don't understand how it really ties into like the symbiotic relationship of everything, so any impact, it's almost like you remember the old Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Yeah.
So if you go here, you open up this door, this may happen. Well, I look at security kind of the same way. It's like, it's not quite chaos theory, but everything can be unraveled one way or the other. If you can't get in here, well, you can try to get in here. If you can't do this to an asset, well, you can try to manipulate it from here. And if you don't look at it from that perspective, you're not going to be able to mitigate or stop anything. And
at what point do you stop, or is it a continuous process? Because it seems like every system is going to have a weakness.
Yeah,
and no matter how often you're going back through that system, there's going to be some outside system designed to get through whatever system you think is secure. So is that just continuous? It's just a process that just never ends?
Yeah, it's a continuous process. And luckily for me, from an employment standpoint, it doesn't end.
I guess that works pretty well for you.
Yeah, so it's been working out pretty well.
You never have the day where you say, okay, you're secure, we're done here. Like it's continuous.
Because there's always ways that you're looking, and sometimes it's even by accident. So for instance, with our pandemic that we're currently going through,
these strange times,
these trying times that we're going through, there was a lot of things just from a supply chain security perspective people didn't think about. Now, again, people like me who are always trying to think about like, all right, what's another thing that can potentially happen? Because I always say, like, I work in the world of security, but I base everything I do off of probability, what's the propensity, and I try to use data. So with the COVID-19 stuff, a lot of businesses were forcing people to work from home. Well, this is where I've also tied in my attorney friends and general counsels, because what started to happen was exactly what I already predicted. You have all these people working from home. Okay. You have a policy for workplace violence. You have a policy that says basically you can't drink at home or drink while you're working. You can drink at home, obviously. And you have all these other things that happen. Well, the problem is you've now crossed the line so far into personal versus private versus business versus this or that. And so what's been happening is, because a lot of people have been essentially forced to be at home that may or may not have been on the fence before about maybe getting a divorce or whatever it happens to be.
Oh, yeah.
Now they're there. Well, sometimes from a financial standpoint, they can't afford to divorce or whatever it is. But either way, you have that line that's been crossed. So now you have two people, maybe in a 2-bedroom apartment, or it can be like a massive house, depends. And so what do companies do now if there's a domestic violence incident while someone's working at home with company assets during the workday? So where does that liability go? And the thing is, nobody has an answer.
Yeah.
And of course,
we're in this new world.
The simple answer is this. Well, you just go back in the office. Mm-hmm. But that would
But Dan. But Dr. Evans.
Yeah, these trying times.
We're in trying times.
I mean, wear your mask and go into your office. But all these things have been happening. So I had a client, and they were asking me 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, and they were like, well, what's your recommendation as far as what if we have an employee, but we're pretty sure they're drinking while they're working? I'm like, if you think it's happening, it's happening. I mean, if they're slurring while you're talking to them and this or that, it was like, I can't 100% say, oh, it's because they're drunk. Maybe they're nervous. Maybe you have bad acoustics. I don't know. I said, but if the probability's there,
it's probably happening.
It's probably going to happen. And so they're like, well, what do we do from a policy standpoint? I'm like, well, again, you cross that line into having people working from home. So you can put all the policies you want. And I always jokingly say, when anytime I meet with a client, the first thing we always do is document review. So we go, hey, Joel, I need you to send me all your processes, policies, procedures, your security master plans, and all these other things. And
they say, or what?
well, it goes one way or the other. Either A, they don't have enough, or B, they send you what I call these beautiful plans.
That no one follows.
Yeah, no one knows.
Somebody wrote them up and then they got stuck on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah, they hired somebody like me or you to go in there and write it. They were like, hey, we're going to hire the security guy and the lawyer to look back through it and make it just beautiful. And I do this all the time. I go through and I'm like, okay. And then they were like, oh, do your gap analysis. And I'm like, well, I can look at a document and I can figure out what's missing and what you need to enhance. I said, but that really doesn't mean anything because I don't know if you're doing it. So I always, after I do that, I always kind of do like these like, I always play the country dumb game. I'm like, hey, Joel, what do you guys do? Like, I don't know if like an active shooter happens or if this or that happens. And
so you interview specific employees?
Well, because like I'll do interviews when I go to the client site, but then I do my really they're you can call them walkarounds, you can call them a tour, whatever it is. But I'll actually go through like an entire facility or high rise, and I do what I picked up in the military is I start targeting people. I go, who's the guy or gal who's probably not going to know this? And typically there's somebody who is one of the first people that people see from the street when they come in. I hate to say it. Mm-hmm. Or you have the opposite. You have like the G.I. Joe wannabe guy who, for whatever reason, never could get in, who's like, I know everything. And but either way, like I always find a gap. And so I'll just play dumb. You know, sometimes, for instance, like I'll go through our policy and they'll have like, anytime a visitor comes in the building, the first thing we do is we check their ID, and then we do this, and then we put it in here, and you know, and then from there, then we make sure they have clearance to come in. And so I'll just do like just light things sometimes, and I'll be like, hey, I don't have my ID, but I have my credit card. Can you use my credit card? You know, it has my name on it, and they'll be like, oh, well, you know. And again, if they're not paying attention, they'll go, oh, yeah, that'll work, even though I know their policy. So I'm sitting there in the back of my mind. I'm like, yeah, I'm dinging you on this. I'm dinging you on that. But another funny story onto that, I have a pretty common name, you know, Daniel Evans. And I've realized there is
Sounds like a fake name.
There's a lot. One of my counterparts, I'm not going to say his name because, you know, but he has a very common name as well. And so we happen to be going to one of our clients in New York, massive client. And we're going in, and we've already gone through all their documents, their processes, policies, procedures. We knew their access control policy, which is basically like, okay, once you get in here, you're going to go to this first desk. And at this first desk, they require a government ID, they require this, they require that. And then we're going to radio into the people at the first turnstile. And then once you go in through there and they get the thing we printed out that we scan, then we let you into your elevator. And then from there, there's this like series of things. So seemingly pretty airtight. So we go in there, and they take my ID, they take my counterpart's ID, and again, pretty common name in New York, which has a lot of people who have my name that goes in and out of buildings like that, and my counterparts as well. So print it out, and I look at mine, and I'm like, and they took a picture, and the picture of me is just so blurry, you can't even tell who it is. And I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, Daniel M. Evans. Daniel J. Evans, okay. I'm like, typo? Maybe not. And so my counterpart gets his, and my counterpart happens to be Caucasian, and it printed out, and the guy who's printed out is black. And John, let's just say his name's John. He had in a past life did other things, so he's able to keep the perfect stone grill, like face never changes or whatever. And he just kind of shows it to me, and I'm like, So we're like, hey, let's see what happens. So we walk over to the turnstiles, and the guys take our little ticket thing with our picture and the barcode on it, but they don't really look. They
don't even look.
No.
They scan it,
and then look over at John, and I'm like, hey, let's get to the elevator. So we get to the elevator, and a lot of modern high rises, you have this thing called destination dispatch system. So basically, you only have access to specific floors based off of your level of access that's granted from access control. And once you scan in there, it's only gonna do whatever the barcode says. Well, we got random barcodes associated with not quite the same people, but the same name. So we just start hitting floors. We're like, oh, here's another massive financial client. Let's see if we can get on their floor. Oh, we can. Here's another massive. And we end up getting into probably 5 or 6 floors right off the bat.
Wow.
To where we just kind of stop.
Oh my God.
And then we get to the client and they're going through and they're like, welcome.
All proud of their security system.
I'm sitting there with the CISO and I'm sitting there with a couple of the other people. And the CISO is like their chief security officer. And these are big wig type people. And it's going there and they're talking about how great it is. And we're like, yeah, and I tell them, I think the process is a good process. And they're like, yeah, it's great. And we hired these other people to do it. And you're just here to assess it and blah, blah, blah. And John just kind of takes our passes and he just kind of slowly starts pushing them over there and doesn't say anything. And then the CISO's face just kind of drops. And they go, okay, so you found a flaw in our system. And we're like, yes. So
it's called humans.
So So let's talk about that. So, we walked back through it and they're just like, well, we're going to get on them and this or that. Now, the reason I'm saying that is, it's always a human element. But what I found is, again, I'll ask these simple questions and I start going, okay. So you have this great process. You have this great policy, it's a great procedure. And I'll be honest, I was like, it's pretty good. I was like, but let me ask you a simple question. Like, this person is working in Manhattan and they're living in wherever they live and they're busing in. And I was asking, the simple question of like, so what are you paying them? And they're like, oh, we're paying them like $13 an hour or something. I'm like, so let me get this straight. You're paying the person who's right here $13 an hour, who is
to be the guy.
Yeah, your first line of defense for 6 years. And then you come off and you're like, I'm going to be Jim Bob. I'm in college now. And what I've seen is just it's hard to sustain relationships after that because it's like, you're talking to somebody, they're like, oh, what have you been doing? Oh, I just graduated high school, or I was working somewhere and now I'm starting college. And they're the same age, but you're like, I remember last year I was riding around in a patrol and we hit a VBIED and my best friend's parts got blown all over me.
Yeah. All of a sudden you're asked to relate to a world that you've been detached from in a completely different world.
And then you're kind of expected to just kind of transition. And so I don't know. I have mixed opinions on the VA, but I can honestly tell you 100% is, especially in the early years, the VA had no clue.
So there was basically just no system to equip soldiers coming back with the tools necessary to transition.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I remember like, all right, well, you get insurance for another 6 months, and here's your card for that, and we'll have somebody else help you write a resume, and go out and be somebody. And you're like, okay. But again, remember, like, you've been training for however long, especially, again, obviously not that people outside of the infantry don't go through stuff, but again, I can only speak to you from like the combat arms perspective of, hey, in combat arms, our whole job in life is to destroy the enemy. And so you've been doing that for a while and you come back and so it's like you have this, so PTSD is like a weird thing because I remember when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, these are people that have nightmares.
Yeah.
These are, lack of better words, these are the pansies. And then you start realizing PTSD is not just nightmares. It's not just like getting frazzled by something. It's almost like a detachment kind of thing, because it's, again, like everything's relative, right? But if in say October of one year you're running patrols in Fallujah, and then the next October you're going to Starbucks in Chicago, which maybe Chicago is probably rough too, but let's say Charlotte.
I don't know what's worse.
Yeah, Chicago may be pretty bad, but Charlotte. But if you've spent, say, 6 years, like I said, kind of back to that example of always being aware of your situation and always being at a heightened sense of awareness, security, and everything else, and you're constantly, it's hard to mellow that out. So I remember, especially back in late 2006 when I was, coming off of deployments and everything else. I got like, here's here's a card for some insurance for 6 months. For 6 months. And all right, well, go out and be somebody. I mean, that's pretty much it. And so I took a break in service, from 2000 and man, I'm trying to remember 2007 until like I came back in like close to 2010, which is crazy. I'm like, wow, that's been in for another 10 years. So I got out. I was in for like 10 years, and I got out, took a break, and the break was actually unplanned. The reason I took the break was, I was like, all right, I'm trying to be, even though I've been on active duty, I'm trying to get out of this kind of like the guard contract. And then I needed to have like a break in service so I can go back and get a regular active duty contract. Because again, it's just, you would think there's a normal system you can just transfer over, but there isn't. You have to, contracts are contracts. It is what it is. And so I got basically because the war is still going on, a lot of my paperwork just got lost. Imagine that, electronic paperwork getting lost. And so I remember when I came off active duty, I had never planned on it. So then, of course, this other event happens in about 2007, 2008. The economy crashes. So at
Good timing, Dan.
Yeah, it was perfect timing. And so I'm sitting there going like, so yeah, I guess I'm giving you the longest story ever how I came to do what I do from security. And I'll get back to the transition question as well.
Let me ask you this, because while we're on the kind of subject of PTSD, I want to ask you this question. So you mentioned the difficulty in coming from an environment where you have to be highly situationally aware. Mm-hmm. You're always on alert. And then you come back and you're kind of asked to not be, but you're kind of stuck in that mode. Do you think that being in your career where you actually get to apply that and add value to different clients, institutions, or whatever it is, where, that skill set is actually highly valued? Do you think that's helped you in any way transition? Or do you think that's kind of, I don't want to use the term normalize, but for lack of a better term, re-normalize into a career?
Yes. Like I said, don't get me wrong. Like I wouldn't have my corporate career if it wouldn't have been for what I did in the military and then what I studied. Because the reality is when I went to grad school, I was not planning on the economy crashing.
Sure.
Go to grad school and the economy just crashed. And I'm like, crap. So the reason I went to grad school is to differentiate myself for other applicants for other places that I was trying to go work for that did similar things what I did in the military. And then the economy just got worse. So I was like, I'm going to apply this doctoral program because this will help me. And because, again, the end goal was still the same. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, also, you get older.
Yeah.
And so I know I'm like kind of answering your question, but yeah, it definitely helped me. It definitely helped. All the lessons I learned when I was a younger soldier and in combat and everything else have 100%, without a doubt, reframed the way I think. Because like I always say, like, work for a massive firm. Mm-hmm. And we're a massive machine, and we have a process of doing what we do. And we're going to hire the best and the brightest kids, and we're going to train them up. But the problem I have is if you're a 22-year-old kid that lived a very, very decent life before then, and you get hired, and we pay pretty well, and we're going to pay you this much money, you have a hard time framing to think about how I think of like, let's say like this building or this organization or this or that, like the worst case scenario. So we, like in the military, we developed like, the most probable course of action, the most likely course of action, and the most dangerous course of action. Well, I can typically get them to where these are smart kids. I mean, I will say, like, in certain ways, they're a lot smarter than I on certain things, but they don't have the context to really think about the really, really bad stuff. Not saying that, like, oh, they're just, softer generation. It's just you're not exposed to it, so it's hard for you to think about the most terrible things you could ever imagine seeing if you've never seen the most terrible things you've ever imagined seeing. And I go, I've kind of seen some of the most terrible things you could ever imagine seeing. And I think about that. So when I assess like as organization security, I'm able to bring in all these lessons. Yes, you have the Grace firewalls. You have this or that. And I know sometimes my clients are like, yeah, damn, but the probability of that happening is blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, and the probability may be low. However,
are you okay with it happening?
Yeah. What's your risk appetite that you're willing to accept? And so that part's definitely helped me. So, again, it's long-winded. So as I've gotten older, I always jokingly say, like, I've definitely learned to like myself a lot better as I got older, because I just remember for a while there's this gap, and I just remember just being angry. I
can imagine that'd be very hard, because you're in a situation where you're forced to develop these skills, literally in the crucible of war.
Yep.
And those skills are highly valued in that context. And then you come out and everyone's like, Dan, stop being like that.
Yep.
Like you go into an office and you're like, well, what if somebody, hey, Dan, stop, just do this.
Yep.
Like focus on something else. But when your brain has been forced into a scenario or a context for so long, you can't just turn it off.
Okay.
And I imagine it would be very angering to just be told that that doesn't have any value. What's been trained into you is no longer valuable. Stop being that way.
Okay.
But you don't have that. You get to actually leverage that skill set somewhat in a just in a great way. So
well,
adding a lot of value.
I can definitely remember from like 2007, early 2011, just being angry. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I don't even really know, like, why am I angry?
Yeah.
And again, part of it is, is like the abrupt transition that didn't happen. And, luckily when I rejoined, the Guard in 2009, late 2009, that once again became like, it's funny because again, I never in my wildest dream would have ever been like, I'm going to be like one of the most corporate of corporate people. I mean, I still don't know if I'm the most corporate, but I work in one of the most corporate organizations in the world. And so it's funny. But like I said, I remember going, I'm never going to be a corporate guy. I'm never going to do this or that. But once I kind of got past like that phase, and whatever that phase is, I can call it like maybe I had PTSD, maybe I didn't. But I definitely had a lot of anger because I'm like, this is what I wanted to do, and it's just not seeming to happen. And of course, luckily, again, the good thing is I was able to fill in that time with education.
Yeah.
And also some
people go the other way, though.
Yeah, some good decisions and some really bad decisions. And which I learned a lesson on those decisions too. But those are things.
But I think you did the smart thing, and thankfully you had the educational background to do that. But some people come back and they're angry, and they don't treat that with education. No. They treat it with something else and maybe go the wrong direction.
Well, and it's easy to get caught up in that because it's like, you come from a culture that is work hard, play hard already.
Yeah.
And, and again, I don't know if I had the foresight, luck, or whatever, it's probably a combination because I don't know, I've always been one of those weirdo people that was.
Yeah, maybe it's just you kind of like learning. So it's like, this is what I want to do this time because you enjoy it.
Yep. And that was a big part of it because I actually, it was funny. Now that I remember, I was coming off active duty, and all of my friends from college, like yourself and Kirk and everybody else, you guys were getting ready to take the LSAT, and I remember thinking like, I don't really know if I want to be a lawyer, but I remember thinking I was like, but I definitely wanted to probably do some more school.
Yeah.
But again, I was still kind of in that like, I don't know, I'll go do something, and but again, it still took me a couple of years to kind of like figure out what that was, because I mean, luckily. I think from an undergrad perspective, at least after the core crap that you have to take, because I think that I still to this day, I think most bachelor's programs, no offense with bachelor programs, I think they're a load of garbage.
Right.
Because for 60 hours, you just do these garbage classes that have nothing to do with anything you want to do. And then you get maybe like 40 hours of what you want to do. And so that 40 hours of classes I got to do in my BA program that I liked, we're all kind of focused on international affairs and to some degree, even like minorly kind of touched on, geopolitical security and, stuff like that. So when I was coming through and coming off active duty and everything else, and I was in that weird transition, I remember going, well, maybe I'll go get a master's in international relations or international security or whatever, because I like that nerd aspect. So, but to your point though, I mean, a lot of people come off and they're going down another path. Because like I said, I mean, I had a situation that happened when I first was going through that transition, and it always starts off bad when you go. So I was at a bar,
right,
and somebody they weren't really necessarily even talking to me. And so when I came off, I kept my fitness regimen up, and I was like killing the weights, and so I was in pretty diesel shape because I'm still eating like I was on active duty, but I was like just killing the gym. So I'm a short guy, but I think my biggest, I was 5'7" at like 200 pounds. But I only had about 6% body fat. So I was pretty diesel at that point. And I was at a bar, and somebody made some stupid statement about stupid veterans or military. And I'd had a drink or so, and I'm just like, have another drink. And I'm thinking like, probably should not have had the drink before that drink. And somebody said something, and I just get pissed off, and let's say I said something, and then they decide them and their boys are going to come at me. So I'm like, sounds like good odds, whatever. Anyways, there was a minor altercation, and the good thing, looking at it, I'd never had anything ever on my record, period. I think even up until that point, I'd only had like a speeding ticket. And so they arrest me, and I go in and, talk to the judge, and, I'm back to my normal self at that point. And he goes, you've never been in trouble, have you? And I remember this is one of his weird moments. Probably helped really reshape me one way or the other. And he goes, are you a veteran? And I'm like, yes, sir. And he goes, all right, well, here's the thing. You can go do this, what is it? I don't know, pretrial intervention or something. And he goes, it's never going to touch you. And I was like, okay. So I went and did that. And I decided at that point, and again, it was a smart decision. I was like, I'm not going to drink for like 6 months. I'm not going to have a drink, period. Because I was like, I need to get my shit together. Because I was working like a job, and, it was paying decent, but I hated it. Some, lack of a better word, some stupid fucking corporate job that I got because a friend of a friend of a friend was like, oh, we'll get you a job. And I just remember thinking, it was like the most office space of jobs that I did really, really briefly. And so, for like 6 months, I didn't drink, I didn't do anything. And then I kind of got my shit together. And at that point, that's when I was like, and not a lot of people know that, because I kept that shit under wraps. I was like, I don't want people to think I'm a piece of shit, But, at the time, not knowing what I know now, I was like, I probably had some PTSD that I just didn't really know. And so I was able to kind of get my shit together. I did make some other bad decisions, but whatever. We're not going to talk about those decisions. But it helped me turn the curb, because I was able to, at that point, I was able to kind of decide to go to graduate school and this or that. I still feel like I said, I mean, it still does happen. The VA has done a better job now, kind of helping people transition. But even then, I just remember thinking like, oh, I don't have any kind of PTSD or anything, because that's what the pansies get. I just remember thinking, I just have all this anger. I mean, anger is not anything related to PTSD, right? But now that I'm older, I can look and go, yeah.
Probably what that was.
Yeah. And, but like I said, I mean, so kind of back to that point about, the Guard and Reserves is great. I've really, really had a great time kind of managing, because you essentially manage two careers now. It's like two professional careers that you have to manage, and it keeps you busy, but it's also rewarding. But there's also the push and pull. So what I've noticed lately is there's now a lot more burden on the Guard. So, think about 2020.
This year, especially, yeah.
So you have the COVID stuff happening. So again, at the beginning, nobody really knew. So, what is it? One way or the other, and of course, I have my opinions on that. We're not going to talk about my opinions on that. But the Guard was called up to do basically to clean nursing homes and cordon off areas, all kinds of other stuff. Well, then you also have all the stuff that have happened from, race relations. And so the Guard's been brought in to deal with that. And then you have also at this time of the year also is if you're in the Southeast and you're in the Guard, it's also hurricane season. So now the Guard's on alert for security. Now you have all that going on, and your members of your Guard are as a sample of the rest of the professional world. So you have doctors, attorneys, consultants, teachers, truck drivers, just about anything that also have another career to manage on top of going, oh yeah, at any given point I could get called up to do, now there's the election coming on. We're already been put on warning that we may get called up to do like election security.
Wow.
And all this other stuff. And again, so I will say it's definitely a balance, trying to manage that. And then, and then prior to this year, like the war, still going on. So, the ARPHAGEN cycle, which is basically the Army's way of like putting you in, this is your cycle of build up and train up, and go on a deployment. You would have, for a while, about every 3 or 4 years, you're also going to go on a deployment. So you're sitting there going like, how am I going to manage my career? And knowing every 3 years, oh yeah, by the way, you're going to go to war. And then you're going to come back and go out and be somebody again. And so, and I will say, like, it's been a pretty substantial burden on the Guard and Reserves with that as well. Because again, you still run into that issue. And then, so even kind of thinking about, I know lately the statistic is suicide rates on military members, not just veterans, has gone up, especially substantially with a lot of people not having the normal social, interactions that you have. And as I've become a massive nerd and I've studied all this stuff and all these crazy certifications there's a direct correlation. If you're not having those normal social interactions and you're not able to produce the normal hormones that go along with that and interactions, it does lead to depression. And if you're already part of a class, of a subclass that's already prone to other things going on, you're going to perpetuate that. And so once again, I go, now that I'm older and I've kind of seen that arc, I go, what's going to happen now? Are we going to have a significant increase of veteran suicide or military suicide? Because again, if you think about it, I mean, I think I'm trying to remember the numbers. I can't remember off the top of my head, but really it's only about less than 1% of the U.S. population belongs to either veteran group or the military. It's a really small percentage.
Yeah, we're asking a very small percentage of the population to carry a very large burden.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so, I've been saying for years, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I look at other, and I'm not 100% not saying anything negative about the U.S., but I have seen other countries that they manage their veterans very differently. Mm-hmm. It's basically like, hey, you go and serve.
Yeah, and I don't think at any point you can ever do enough, right? I mean, there's always going to be some failure, but we should, you say, it used to be all you can be. We should try to do all we can do and really spare no expense. And to look at, veteran health as something on a balance sheet, or to look at it as a budget to be cut, or a place to save money just blows my mind when, there's been such a huge debt that has been accrued.
Well, the other thing I've seen too is, so if you think about like even transitioning from a workforce perspective, forever there was this massive push of got to hire MBAs because these MBAs know how to teach, train, and do all this other stuff. And I've always been like, why don't you just hire NCOs? That's all you do as an NCO.
That's all they do, yeah.
Teach, train, advise, run training, and manage processes. And so I've been saying forever, I'm like,
and you probably get the best training that you can possibly get for that.
Well, because you're also you're a practitioner of it.
You're a practitioner, and the stakes are high.
You're going to run it. One thing you learn as a young sergeant is you learn how to run a schedule. You learn how to mitigate processes. You know how to do all the stuff that you teach in like an MBA program. And so I go like, I mean, I don't know. To me, it's a no-brainer. I'm like, I don't know, VA. How about this? You have these guys and gals coming off active duty or the Guard or Reserve or whatever. How about you have a better outlet to getting them into companies instead of having, nothing wrong with the 27-year-old smart kid, but you also have this other 27-year-old smart kid who
has all this experience.
So,
yeah.
And that's what I still haven't seen that. And then with the current climate that we're in now, don't get me wrong, diversity is a great thing. But I once again have seen where for a while veterans were in that equation. Mm-hmm. It seems like we've once again fallen out of that equation.
Yeah.
And so again, and I'm like, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So.
Well, listen, here, I want to do this again very soon because there's a lot more stuff I want to talk about.
No, absolutely.
But let's wrap it up for today because I want to be cognizant of your time. I know you got to get back on the road, but dude, thank you so much for coming down here today. And you want to do this again soon?
Yeah, like
Friday afternoon, anytime, come on by.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, it worked out well today because I just wrapped up a major project at work on Wednesday, and honestly,
so you're working from home in this time of crisis.
In these trying times, I'm working from home. But actually, today I didn't have a ton of stuff to do other than admin stuff.
Yeah.
And
I can wait till tomorrow.
Well, I did it all yesterday. So
so
today I was like, you know what, I have like a massive leisure bank of days, so I just took the day.
Well, there's a lot more stuff I want to talk about with you because you have a very unique perspective, both on the academic and the practitioner side. You briefly mentioned your foreign policy stuff, and I mean we could spend another 2 hours just talking about that. But I want to do that soon.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I do think we're kind of in a transition period for more than one reason. And I want to get a little bit into the weeds and kind of, have a little nerd session about some foreign policy stuff.
Yeah, I always jokingly say I can go one way or the other, and either one I can talk about forever. I don't know if it's good or bad.
You want to talk about the cool guy stuff or the or the academic stuff?
Yeah,
we can do a little of both.
We can look at the geopolitical state and the emphasis as far. Oh no, trust me, I could do that every day of the week as well.
Well, let's do that soon, man.
All right,
so
awesome,
come on back down and yeah, thanks for coming by. Thanks for coming by, man. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
All right.
Awesome.